What is a true fact so baffling, it should be false? There is a 1 in roughly 5.2 to the 61st power chance that, if you were to slap a table, all of the molecules in your hand and the table would miss each other, and your hand would go through it. Story time. I learned this fact from a deep intellectual conversation with my engineering class 2 years ago, so there very well could be some kind of detail I'm missing here, but nonetheless, what I said is theoretically true. There used to be a radioactive energy drink called Raditha that was in the US market for a decade from 1918 to 1928. Some of the more prominent users had to be buried in lead coffins. You could take away all of Wayne Gretzky's goals that he scored during his career and he would still be the all-time NHL points leader off his assists alone. Bonus Gretzky fact, he and his brother own the record for being the highest scoring pair of siblings. Brent had 4 points in his whole career. The youngest mother to give birth became pregnant at 4 years old. If a gorilla looks grumpy, it's because they are relaxed and at ease. The USA is the third most populated nation on Earth. If you were able to add 1 billion people to the US population today, it would still be the third most populated nation on Earth. The gravity of black holes is so great that it literally bends light around the black hole, so that if you could somehow stand close enough to a black hole and look straight ahead, you would actually see the back of your own head. Every day that you go to work you pass more people than an average medieval person did in their entire life. Greenland extends east of, west of, south of and north of Iceland. A morbidly obese person can survive with absolute starvation without any sickness or feeling ill, under close control. There have been studies since the 60s. There is a patient in 1973 who went under a 382-day starvation diet for therapeutic purposes under close control with only vitamin and mineral supplements, and water intake without protein, carbohydrate or fat intake, no food at all. Dropped from 207 kilograms to 88 kilograms and maintained it. After a follow-up checkup 5 years later, the patient was 96 kilograms, stabilized. Prolonged fasting had no ill effects. If anybody is curious about the article, I'll leave the Pubmed ID in the doobly-doo. People were deliberately infected with malaria to cure their syphilis, and the man who developed this treatment, Julius Werner Jauregg, received the Nobel Prize for it. The extremely high fevers of the malaria infections killed the syphilis bacteria, then the patients were cured of the malaria using quinine. Giraffe seat bones. The life of Frayne Selleck, the luckiest unlucky man in the world. January 1962, Frayne is riding on a train through a freezing canyon when it fell into an icy river. All 17 other passengers died, while he escapes with a broken arm and hypothermia. 1963, on his first plane trip he was sucked out of the plane's door and landed in a haystack, unscathed. 19 other people were killed in the crash. 1966, he was riding in a bus when it skidded off the road into yet another icy river. 4 passengers drowned, while he only received some minor cuts and bruises. 1970, his car's engine burst into flames while he was driving, but he managed to escape before it exploded. 1973, in yet another driving incident, his car's engine was doused with hot oil from a broken fuel pump. This caused flames to shoot through the air vents, singing off all of his hair. He was otherwise unharmed. 1995, he was hit by a bus, but only sustained minor injuries. 1996, to escape a head-on collision with a United Nations truck on a mountain curve, he swerved into a guardrail that broke on impact. To save himself, he jumped out of his car's open door and grabbed onto a tree branch as he watched his car plummet off the cliff. Suffice to say the guy had a complicated relationship with the Grim Reaper. Robot note, he also won $1.1 million in 2003. Ireland was a net exporter of food during the Great Potato Famine. Taser is actually an acronym for Thomas A. Swift's electric rifle. Taser. More people died making the V-2 rockets during World War II than were killed by them. Another fun fact about V-2 rockets. Germany was facing a large issue with rocket fuel shortages during the project because people kept drinking it. The fuel was made from 70% ethyl alcohol and 30% water, distilled from potatoes. It was the most economically viable fuel at the time, since they were already very low on other fuels. To stop workers from drinking it, they denatured the alcohol, essentially poisoning it, but people kept drinking it anyways, and getting extremely ill. This simply caused people to start leaving the V2 program, suggesting that they were only in it for the free alcohol. This also means that any alcohol over 70% ABV is stronger than actual World War II rocket fuel. TSA's fail rate is over 80%. I personally know someone who in his carry-on accidentally packed a loaded handgun, made it on the plane, and was so freaked out when he landed, he UPS'd it back home, and took a Greyhound bus after his trip. Switzerland has accidentally invaded Liechtenstein thrice in the last 50 years. On the first time in 1976, Swiss military got lost and ended up in Liechtenstein, so the Liechtensteiners offered them drinks like proper hosts. On the second time in 1992, Swiss military forgot that a certain observation post was actually not in Swiss territory, but in Liechtenstein territory, so they just said sorry and forgot about it. Then again in 2007, the Swiss army got lost and entered Liechtenstein, but eventually realized they weren't in Switzerland anymore. Toto. So they turned back. Liechtenstein didn't even know this happened till the Swiss apologized again, to which they basically said, no problem, bro. Takeaways. The Swiss army are bad with directions. The Liechtenstein people are chill bros. When the 22nd president of the US, Grover Cleveland, was 27 years old, he was friends with a married couple who had a baby girl named Frances. As a gift, he bought them a high-end baby stroller for little Frances. 21 years later, he married Frances and she became the youngest first lady. Think about that. The color orange is named after the fruit. Sharks evolved before trees did. Trees evolved before the bugs responsible for rotting, that is bacteria which could eat lignin and cellulose, did. Thus when they died, they just fell over in place and lay there instead of rotting. Over time the weight of the upper layers of tree corpses compacted the lower levels, which eventually became the coal we dig up and use today. An eyewitness to Lincoln's assassination at Ford's Theater told his story on national television. Only 4 people have been to the Challenger Deep, the deepest part of the ocean. One of those people is James Cameron, the director of Titanic. From 1613 and 1620 a samurai traveled to Rome by way of Mexico. During this time, Shakespeare was still alive. Virginia had been founded for around a decade. Galileo was accused of heresy, and Pocahontas arrived in England. He met the Pope, and he was made a Roman citizen. His name was Hasekura Tsuneniga, and was the last Japanese person to officially visit Europe until around 1860. President John Tyler, born in 1790, has 2 living grandsons. A million seconds ago was week before last, August 23rd. A billion seconds ago was 1987. Mike the Headless Chicken lived without a head for 18 months. There was this French guy named Terrare in the late 1700s that could eat anything, in any amount. He was able to eat a quarter of a cow in one day, and ate dinner for 15 for one meal. When he was being tested, he was even able to swallow an entire eel, with bones included, without hesitating. When he went to the military service, they used him as message transport, but after being captured he went back and tried to find a cure. In the hospital where he was staying, he was suspected of eating a baby, so they kicked him out. He was average weight, and when he died a few years later they could see inside his stomach just by opening his mouth. A 500-pound cigarette smoking, beer drinking brown bear named Wojtek was enlisted and served in the Polish army during World War II. Private Wojtek helped the Polish win the brutal Battle of Mont Cassino, and was even promoted to corporal. Following the war, he retired in Scotland. Cheetahs can't roar, but they can meow like house cats. The longest time between 2 twins being born is 87 days. If every single person on the entire planet took part in a rock paper scissors contest, where everyone paired up and played, losers were knocked out, and winners stayed on, etc., You would only have to win 33 times in a row to beat all 7.53 billion people on the planet. There is no universally accepted definition of vegetable. It's a cultural and culinary term and varies from place to place. In chess there are over 9 million variations after just 3 moves each. 288 billion different possible positions after 4 moves each. In a complete game there are more possible positions than there are electrons in the observable universe. I've put some stuff in the doobly-doo if you're interested in some of the facts in the video. That's it for today's video. Take care of each other in the comments and do all the YouTube stuff.